and I had an antenna, which I'll talk about a little more later, which used that PVC pipe for spreaders, and we had a good collection of stuff. And found a nice little spot near Mount Hood, which is a very scenic spot. We operated in that one place many times. And there's our crew at the time. My beard is a different color. Wes seems to have a little more hair. And so's Roger. But we all went up there and operated many times. So the other folks there would make sense too. Roger and I found that place. We went scouting one time and looked at some candidate spots and stumbled into that one. And it was really nice. It's a little bare knob that sticks up there, and it's really good. There's the seat. There's the view of Mount Hood from it. And here's a little extra knob that sticks up a little higher yet and looks down on our campsite. Our campsite's down in here, and there's my field day special antenna, which again I'll talk about a little more later on. That's what we see. We're looking roughly east there, so we have a good shot out. We're in the mountains really that are much higher than we are, at least in the coast. Roger got up on the top of the little knob there with a homemade quad and operated a little 2 meters. The only time we were running a VHF from up there. And that'd be a nice scenic shot. There's the rotator we used. Okay, now we'll forward a little bit to 1980 or so. And during the early part of this period, somewhere around in there, that I did this with Wes for a number of years. And each year, I noticed that Wes was kind of getting quieter and not being very happy about things. And that really bothered me. I really like Wes and have a great deal of respect for him. And he's the guy that got started the whole thing altogether. And I couldn't figure out what was the problem, so I asked him. And it turns out that Wes's idea of field day is more of an adjunct to mountain climbing. What you do is it's basically a mountain climbing exercise where you go and climb up to the top of the peak somewhere, and maybe on Sunday morning, get out a homebrew rig, throw the antenna over a tree branch and operate. And what I had evolved to was making more and more elaborate antennas, trying to work more stations, make my station more efficient, and it became a bigger and bigger deal, which turns out just wasn't his style at all. So we parted ways for field day, and he's gone his way and I've gone mine, and we both enjoyed ourselves very much, and it's worked out fine. But that's one thing I would suggest that people who do this kind of thing kind of work out and think about is the people you go with. Do you have the same goals? Are you really after the same thing or not? And if not, then it's better that you probably do things separately. And that worked for us. And since then, I've done most of my field days either with David Ford, shown here, or Tom Lasso, and both of those again are here listening, and will keep me honest, I hope. This here is a 40-meter version of the field day special antenna. I got the rope up about 90 feet, roughly 30 meters with a slingshot. Let's see, the Brits call it a catapult, and hoisted it up. And this one particular year, we had that kind of a 2-element antenna for 40, 20, and 15, and we drove up with the car for that one instead of packing it in. And we actually were top in our class that one year. Never been top of my class before or since, but considering there's no special class for people who try to do quite well by usually being around the 5th or thereabouts in the ratings. We'd bring along our kids when Dave and his wife would come, and I and my wife, and both of our we each have two kids, and both came with us. Those are my two, Blind Man's Bluff looks like. And my son there, Sam, is now 40 or 43 or so, and Robin is 47. So that was a long time ago, but they had a lot of fun. And there's Dave's son, Stephen, who's now a emergency room physician, and Sam, who's a programmer, and my son. So it was a long time ago. We'd go up on the side of Crater Lake and find a nice spot. One time we were interrupted in the morning just as we were packing up to leave by a herd of cattle that came through to graze, and we had to pick things up really fast before they got all torn up. Another time, Dave and I were sitting there at about 2 in the morning outside with our headsets on working CW, and we heard this, and what was that? And we took off the headphones, and it happened again. It was apparently, I'm quite sure it was a cougar that was either announcing something about its territory or having some kind of a dispute with another one. Never saw it, never have seen a cougar up here. Okay, then a while later, Dave got a pilot's license and built an airplane. He built this airplane, and actually the two of us flew to Alaska on another trip together in that plane with Dave flying. And one time we decided we would meet at a site down south of Portland, pretty close to Crater Lake. And Dave was to fly down and I was to drive down. It was before I got my own pilot's license, and meet up. And Dave was delayed, so I drove about 40 or 50 miles or so south to Klamath Falls to find a room down there. The room we had hoped to reserve right close by there wasn't available because of a model railroad fan convention that took place every year. So I took off and I drove down to Klamath Falls, and it was just getting dark as I was coming back. And I drove by this long, swampy lake, Klamath Lake, and the mosquitoes were so thick that I had to use my windshield washers to clear the windshield enough so that I could see where I was going. This is what my car looked like after I got up to the place where Dave was. So that's a cautionary note about the mosquitoes, although we'd already seen some really bad ones. And when we picked our spot for field day that was a long way away from the lake. This is Crater Lake. It's the rim there is about 7,000 feet or so, and it's really scenic. And we did our operating from the flank of the mountain. In fact, that's the spot we picked, just a nice little spot in the woods. And that was another one which we didn't pack in very far for. And then after I got my pilot's license and my airplane, that's my little airplane right there, and then David, his airplane, we flew into a nice town called Prospect, Oregon, which is along the Rogue River. And we got our stuff in some backpacks and hiked about a mile or so out into the woods and operated from there. And we've tried to do that a few other times, and with limited success. I think we went to Prospect one other time, and those are the only 2 times we managed to fly into someplace. One problem is that so many of these airports are down in the valley, they're not on top of a peak, so if we did fly into someplace, we'd have to schlep quite a ways up the mountain, and unfortunately, we're not getting any younger. And then, so when we went to Prospect, I went to snoop around and scout. Dave was delayed again, and so I decided to take the time and go scout for a possible field day location. And I was hiking along in this kind of a sparsely wooded area. It had been logged some time ago. And I saw that right there in that picture. And it was a grizzly bear. And we don't have grizzly bears around here or around there. We have black bears, but that sure with the nose and so forth looks an awful lot like a grizzly. And I spent 6 years in Alaska, so I'm quite familiar with bears and various kinds, and knew that the only way I could survive if it decided to dislike me was to find some kind of a tree to climb, and there, as you can see, there wasn't anything around. So I was just kind of frozen and thinking about plan B and plan C and not coming up with anything at all. And then I noticed that it hadn't moved, and so I looked at it really carefully, and I was sure that thing was a bear. I looked at it again, and I finally walked around and discovered that it was a stump, and it was the scariest looking stump I ever saw in my life. Here's a typical operating position. We use clipboards, which are just pieces of corrugated plastic, kind used for making signs. It's very rigid and very lightweight, and just some clips on the top, and put the sheets of paper on it, and they work very well. That right there, maybe you can see the little laser spot a little easier. That is my rig. It's a 15 meter super hat rig transceiver that I designed and built just for field day, and it works super well. I'm very, very happy with it. It's got the nicest AGC of any rig I've ever used. 400 hertz bandwidth or so on CW. And nice supplied me the matched crystals for it. And this is a 40 meter version of the Dave Ford built, because mine doesn't do 40 meters. Unfortunately, he was kind of pushed for time in getting it done, and so he didn't put in an AGC circuit. And that was kind of a handicap most of the time we used it, but it did work just fine. I used all homebrew equipment for many years. Finally, I had a keyer that I made with some micro switches, which worked okay, but it got stolen. They were preloaded micro switches, matched ones out of a big bunch of them. And so about that time, I came across this palm keyer. I'm sure that they no longer make them. I don't think they made them for an awful long period of time, but they are just wonderful. It's a little bitty keyer with some memories in it, which are really great when you're operating solo, particularly. And I hold it to the board with a magnet from a disk drive that's powerful enough to hold it through the 1/4 inch or so of board. And so I can move it around and set it where I want, and not have it jump off the table or slide around while I'm operating, but I can move it when I want to. And it looks like some other stuff down here, battery down there, I think. I'll show you a little bit more about that kind of thing here shortly. Okay. And I've done field day just about every year. I've missed very, very few of them. One of the reasons for missing one was going to Friedrichshafen, which happens to be usually the same weekend as field day. It's in Friedrichshafen, Germany, and it's really a fun, great place. You can see my EasyNext sign where I was selling my software there. And this is really hard to beat for a nice place to go. This is the waterfront on the Bodensee, and my very good friend Gert Jansen and his wife Valtra. He is DF6SJ, and they're wonderful people. They put us up when we go there. And he helped me out in my sales also in the booth. He was my translator, among other things. Sometimes the weather is great, sometimes it's not so great. This was one of the latter kind. That's west back there, I think, and we've got a tarp over things to try to keep ourselves dry. And we've operated in quite a variety of weather. One time, Dave and I walked up to a ridge way up in the Olympic Mountains in Washington, And I remember having to, we had to keep everything really light because it was like a 9-mile hike in and a 4,000-foot elevation gain. So we just took an abbreviated set of gear, operated only 20 and 15 and not 40. And only had a backpacking tent. Normally I take along a big enough tent like this thing here where we can actually sit in it at night on folding chairs and operate in the shelter. But we only had the backpacking tent that time, and so we had to operate outside, and I had to quit operating when my fingers literally got too numb to run the gear. And here's that. And that one there was just a couple of years ago in 2020 during the pandemic. I went up to a site that Tom Rousseau and I have gone to quite a number of times. I went up there with Dave also. It's up behind Hood River, Oregon. And there was a forecast. The forecast was pretty good as far as rain and stuff went, but I didn't pay too much attention to the wind report. And it turned out it got up to about 50 miles an hour. And I got my antennas up somehow the evening before and went to operate. I got out my little folding chair and all my super lightweight stuff and got it out and set it up. And every time I'd try to operate, a big gust would come along and tip over the radio and tip over the table and that kind of stuff. And I finally gave up. And I think I worked 2 stations or something and went back home. So that was just not a very good time for field day. One of my tricks, one of my secrets for doing field day is my bulletproof list. I've got these lists for other occasions also. When I do cross-country flights in my airplane, I've got similar lists for the things I need for that, or camping under the wing and that kind of stuff. And this list was developed over years. Every time I go, I find something that is new or different or changed. For example, maybe I need some more medications that I didn't used to, and now I need to remember to put in my hearing aids and so forth. So it keeps changing, but it's always up to date. And I know that if I take everything on that list, I won't leave anything essential behind. One other thing that I highly recommend is something I used to do regularly, and that is before you go, the day before, take the antenna, string it up between a couple of trees somewhere, a backyard or from your house to the ground or wherever you can. It doesn't have to be high. Take your rig out, set the whole rig up, complete with batteries and solar panel, whatever, gear and other stuff. Hook everything up and then talk to somebody. And then after you do that, then you take all of the pieces and you take them apart one at a time and put them all in a box. And then you know you have a box containing a rig that works and all the stuff you need. So that's a recommendation I can make. Here are a few things that are on that list. And this is a pretty old picture, so I'm going to show you a little more updated stuff here shortly. There's the battery at the time and the headlamp for operating at night. There's my 2015 meter rig. That looks like another battery there. I don't know. There's the solar panel and a cable so that we don't have to put the solar panel right underfoot, and so that we can move it around as the sun moves and the shadows move around. The keyer I mentioned, there's some twine that I like to use to put up the antennas. And there's my field day special antenna, and I'll talk about that shortly. These are the solar panels I use now. These are made by Power Film. And they're quite expensive, I think. I found them a couple of times at Dayton. They would go to Dayton and sell off their seconds or their old models or something for really low price. And so I bought several of them. As you can see, they fold up very, very small, and that's kind of a cloth that they're on. And they're extremely lightweight. They weigh almost nothing. This one here is the newer version of this one, but they work equally well. And one of the really neat things about them is that each one of these sections has got enough cells so that it produces the whole 12 volts. And then they're all in parallel. Normally you have some number, 33 or 6 or something. You have a series of larger cells that are all connected in series, and you get a little shadow or a leaf falling on any one of them, and the whole string goes dead, just like the old Christmas tree lights. In these, you can block off any one, and it just cuts down the output by that fraction. And so they're really nice, and I haven't seen any other solar panels that have that feature. If you can spot these or something like them, and you want to keep your weight down, it's great. They claim to put out 300 milliamps, and so they end up putting out about 200 under realistic conditions, which is just about what I need for my rig to keep even with my total current consumption. I've just got a couple of batteries there for size comparison, so you can see what the size is. Batteries, I can spend a whole session here talking about nothing but batteries and power sources. These are some of the things I've used over the years. I started out with a bunch of nickel cadmium D cells and slowly evolved. This here is a lead acid battery with about, oops, back here. Hang on, please, folks. There we go. This is a lead acid battery, about 3 amp hours. I found that about 2 amp hours suits me fine. What I do is my rig current consumption is a bit under 200 milliamps on receive, and when I'm transmitting about half the time or a little less, and about half of that time is actually key down. So I've figured that I average about 200 milliamps. And so my solar panel provides about 200 milliamps during the day, which keeps up with the current drain from the rig. And so when the sun goes down at night, then I've got a fully charged battery, and I can operate. If I have a 2 amp hour battery, I can operate for 10 hours overnight with it, which is enough. And so that's the way I figure it. And so these are all in that general category. This one here is a bit bigger. This one here is, I think, a 5 amp hour. But this one here actually has, I did it again. I went to point and I clicked it. Okay. This was 11. This is a 11 A size nickel cadmium batteries. And a really nice thing about nickel cadmium batteries is they'll tolerate a 10% overcharge just about indefinitely. So I can hook that to the solar panel and not worry about it overcharging or being damaged by overcharge, and not have any regulation whatsoever. If you never reach full charge and the solar panel just sat there and pumped a couple hundred milliamps into it, no problem. And the way I handled the varying voltage, of course, when it's fully charged and getting solar panel stuff in 200 milliamps into it, the voltage goes up to more than 1.5 volts per cell, which can be too high. Maybe not for your situation, but the way I solved that problem is I tapped it at 10 cells and 9 cells. And so while it's actively charging, I would hook up to the 9 cell tap. And then at night, as the voltage would start to drop, I would go to the 10 and 11 cell tap. And that's the simplest system. Then I decided I wanted to try using lithium-ion batteries when they became available. By the way, you can do the same trick with nickel metal hydride batteries. They really will tolerate a 10% overcharge for a while without any real damage, I found. And you don't need to worry about it. If you're going to step away from the rig for quite a while to eat lunch or something, you can just unplug it there while the solar panel's on it. and not worry about it too much. So, and modern AA cells have close to 2 amp hours of capacity. This is 3 cells of lithium ion. This is actually a lithium polymer battery, and that puts out something like 11.7 volts during most of its discharge cycle, and it goes up to what is it, 14.2, I think, when it's fully charged. But in order to charge that, you've got to have a voltage limited supply. You have to have a pretty good voltage regulator to charge that, as you do with the lead acid battery. That requires a constant voltage charger also. Finally, this is become my favorite, and that's the lithium iron battery, lithium iron phosphate. And they're really nice. They have an extremely flat discharge curve. The voltage changes very little. A 4-cell one sits there at about 12.6 or 8 volts for most of its discharge time. And the voltage on full charge doesn't get very high. And they're a lot safer than regular lithium ion batteries. And it's just got everything going for it, except for they cost about, I don't know, 4 times as much as the lithium ions. So that's my favorite, but the expense is the one downside to those. They also, of course, require a charger that is pretty precisely voltage limited. And I just wanted to mention, I've got, you can see a fuse holder here on a couple of these all built on. And for the ones that don't have a fuse holder, here's just a little extension of fuse holders, a couple of different kinds. And I'm going to talk about the importance of those in a couple of minutes. These are just a couple of accessories that I sometimes take and sometimes don't. This is a little directional watt meter, which can be handy. And this is a transmatch. And this transmatch is based on a design from Wes's solid state design for the radio amateur. And it works very well. It's got a little T match in it, one inductor and a couple of capacitors. And the band switch just changes the tap on the inductor. And it's got a little bridge for tuning, a little resistive bridge. And that works quite well and is reasonably efficient. It moves very little power with it. This directional watt meter was described, I wrote up an article on that in QST years ago. And that might be on my website. I think it's at easymac.com. This is my battery charger, voltage regulator, and one of the features of it is that it was really initially designed to work with the 3-cell lithium-ion battery, which is great for the solar panel. You can hook the solar panel. The solar panel provides enough voltage for it, whereas it doesn't really provide enough voltage to charge a 4-cell one. And as it's discharging, the 11.6 or 11.7 volts isn't quite enough to keep my homemade rig happy on 15 meters, so I need more voltage. So what I do is I have one of those little very cheap Chinese boost regulators inside it with some extra filtering on the input and output to keep down the RFI. And so I can switch it on to boost right here, and that'll get it up to 14 or so volts, which is what my rig really likes to have. And so that's something that I use with either that or the lithium iron phosphate batteries. For tables, boy, we did all kinds of things about tables, and I tried to cut this talk back a little bit, so I didn't show some of the iterations. Dave created a very nice table. Wes made one up with some rods and a piece of plywood, and Dave constructed one pretty much from scratch that all folded up really nice and small and was lightweight. We used those various times, but what I finally settled on was this little triangular folding stool, which is aluminum, and it's extremely lightweight. And then I just set this piece of corrugated plastic on top of it, and it works fine, as long as you keep your weight sort of in the middle of it. Don't put too much stuff around the edge. So that's what I've used for quite some time now. It sure didn't work in that wind that I showed you with the tent, though. Here's the toolkit I always take along, and this is a really neat thing. It's a butane powered soldering iron, and some solder, a little bit of wire, various kinds, a couple of clip leads, tape, wire cutters, some hemostat clamps, a little teeny screwdriver, and an assortment of little transistors and diodes and capacitors and a few things like that, and a multimeter. And I have used every one. Oh, and here's a little wire nut too. Those little teeny wire nuts are really handy. And some glasses. These are like reading glasses that are 4x power, so you can use them for just magnifying. And I've used every one of these tools at one field day or another. And the whole kit doesn't weigh very much and doesn't take up much room. But boy, have they come in handy. Oh yes, this little thing here. I can hear Tom chuckling, even though he's got his mic muted. Tom Rousseau and I were up on the hill one field day, and it was just turning dark, and I was sitting in there. Oh, and let me preface this story just a little bit. I always had a fuse in series with my battery, and I was getting ready for field day the night before, and a fuse holder broke, and I didn't have another fuse holder. And so I thought, well, you know, I've been carrying this thing around for 20 years or 30 years or something, and don't have I've never needed the fuse. The fuse is never blown, so I can surely get away with it this one time. So I had also just put a switch in the 2015 meter rig for the first time, a power switch. Before you just it came on and I plugged it in, but I got fancy and put the switch on there. So we went up to field day, and it was just getting dark, and I was just plugging in the rig in order to make sure everything was working, because we just had our antennas up and so forth. And Tom steps into the tent with his headlamp on, and I see smoke in the light from his headlamp. And I thought, oh, something's wrong with this headlamp. And then I realized, no, the smoke is coming from below the headlamp. It's coming from this wire that is connecting my battery to my rig. And I just have these banana plugs for power. And these wires in this little ribbon cable separated. They dropped right out of the insulation and hit the tent, burned some holes in the tent. There's one, or the tent floor. There's one right there, and there's another one right there. And it turns out that I'd plugged in the banana plugs backwards. And I had this crowbar diode, which was a diode hooked around backwards to prevent the rig, to save the rig if you got the power backwards. And so what happened is that there was an immediate short circuit on this from this battery. I think it was a lead acid battery, and it was putting out a gazillion amps. And of course, I yanked it out. And fortunately, number one, the power switch was turned off, so the rig never got the backwards power. It was just the diode that was hooked right directly across the power connection. Also, though, there was this tantalum capacitor across there. And what I found out when I opened things up is that the diode had protected it maybe for a few seconds, but then it was totally cremated. All that was left of the diode was the leads hanging there, and it had actually gotten hot enough to melt the solder, and they were drooping down. But the tantalum capacitor, which had the reverse voltage applied across it, was still intact and was a very good short. So it was actually the tantalum capacitor that did the protection. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway, that was one of the times. Another time we were, again, Tom and I were up at the same site, I think it was. And we got into some lightning, which is unusual around here, but we had some lightning. And we were getting these big voltage is induced into the antenna. I disconnected the antenna when it got kind of close, but I wasn't quite fast enough. And all of a sudden, my rig quit working on one band, and I went and troubleshot it and found out it was a diode that had blown in there that was used only on 15 meters. And so I replaced the diode from my little kit using a soldering iron. And finally, the most interesting one was when Dave and I went out one time, and I turned on the sideband rig, and all I was hearing was sideband stations. And I came to realize the frequency was off by a couple hundred kilohertz. And I couldn't figure that one out right off. There's a frequency shift in the things when you go from one band to the other at about that amount. I thought that was involved. But what it turned out to be was I finally found it. It was a broken trimmer capacitor, a little air trimmer that had physically broken. And so I thought, okay, what am I going to do now? What am I going to replace this with? Because I had a very limited amount of that kind of stuff in the kit. And I thought, well, how about some coax? I've got some RG 174 1/8 inch diameter coax here. And I know that 50 ohm coax is about 30 puff per foot. And I eyeballed it and guessed it was, I don't know, 20 or 30 puff or something like that. So I cut off what I figured was about the right length and just an open stub, if you will, and soldered it on. And by golly, it put us right on frequency. And we operated the whole rest of the contest with this piece of coax hanging out the back. Now, let's see. I am getting right around 9:30. I think I got started a little late. I don't want to goof up the whole system here. So, Farhan, if you can somehow shout at me when we are getting close. I hope I can hear you. I don't know if I can. Maybe I'll need to drop back to the main screen here in a moment. What I'll do is I'll maybe run for another 10 minutes. Yeah, my ears on. Not like you can like.
Hang on. Turn the mic around.
Yeah, I hear you. And I want to let you other folks know that we people who are operating U.S. Field Day welcome DX stations. You can't participate in the contest by getting scores and getting published in QST, but you can still make contacts, and we can get 1 point for the contact, just like we normally do for any U.S. contact. So we welcome any DX. You just all it is on CW and phone is just signal report, and you would use DX for your the rest of your reply, and that would be it. And I've worked a few Europeans during Field Day. This is the so Field Day being for the U.S. The problem is for me is that where I am is right there. And this is a map of the population of the U.S. As you can see, I'm here and the people are there. And so the problem is to get antennas that will reach that, being that I limit myself to 5 watts output. And to give you an idea of what kind of distances we're talking about here, here are some typical distances. The nearest really good bunch of people, except for Los Angeles, starts about here, which is going on 3,000 kilometers. And to reach New England, which has got a whole bunch of people up there, now we're talking 4,000 kilometers, and likewise down here in Florida. So what kind of an antenna do I use to reach these people? I got to approach this like DX. The angles that I need to achieve for good efficiency is down around a couple of degrees. So I can't have high angle signals will bounce many times and not be nearly as effective. So it's just like a DX problem. So the antenna I use has this kind of a pattern. Now this is kind of misleading because it's a different scale and everything else, but it just gives you a general idea. I've got an antenna that doesn't waste much out the back. This load really doesn't have much power in it. So most of my power is in the forward load. And I pulled it down just a little bit more than it shows here, so that I cover most of the U.S. I'm skimpy down here around California, which is useful, a bunch of stations. But otherwise, I miss a little bit in here, southern New Mexico and so forth. But the big population center I hit very well, plus I hit into the populated parts of Canada, around Montreal, so forth, Ontario. And so that's what I use for an antenna for 20 and 15 meters. It looks like this. That's my field-based special antenna. It's a 2-element beam. It's kind of like a field-based special, except for it's designed a little differently. And you can actually make it so that you can switch directions on it by putting another feed line down and leaving one up. If you make them the right length, you can leave one open circuit and the other one fed. And of course, for field day, there's nobody really out back as far as U.S. and Canada is concerned, except for Alaska and Hawaii, and actually those two rear loads hook them up well enough. So you've got these spreaders, which are 8 feet long, and they're just made out of PVC pipe. And then later on, I decided, gee, it'd be cool if I could have a 15-meter antenna. This is a 20-meter antenna. I have a 15-meter antenna. So what I did was I took and I made a Yagi, a 15-meter Yagi, converted beacon Yagi, where this is one element right here, and that's the driven element, and this is the reflector right here. And I had to fiddle the feed point a little bit to make a matching network so it would match on both bands. And this is just held down by some rocks or weights. And so it still only requires these 2 supports to hold up, one on each end, and that's it. And so it goes up relatively quickly and down, and you only need to shoot 2 ropes over tree. And so I've been using that for a long, long time, and I used one from home for quite a while that was reversible. Now here, after a while, we wanted to cut down weight even more, so we started using a tree branch that we picked up for the spreaders. They don't really have much, they don't have to be very strong. There's not much bending moment to them, and they just need to kind of hold things apart. And then you can use rocks for these weights right here and end up not having to carry quite so much stuff. To get California, I generally put up another dipole, and I have I've used a couple of variations. This one here is a 40 and 15 meter dipole with a trap right here, and then a the 20 meters is a separate dipole that's hung down underneath like that. And that's because I couldn't, with the kind of traps I was using, which was little coax traps made with RG174, I couldn't get enough Q on them. I lost an unacceptable amount of power from one band or another when I tried to use them for 20 meters also. Later on, I came up with traps that work better, and I just have a single wire. This also goes up, this with 2 supports, because this string here, this is some of that twine, goes on up to the support. This is the whole field day special, including the 15 meter Yagi right here. This is it. And this is the dipole I'm using now, which is 40, 20, and 15. The traps use little powdered iron cores and silver mica capacitors. This is a Vallon at the feed point. And so you can see that weighs very, very little and takes up very little room. And that's my whole station. It's really amazing. It's absolutely amazing when I'm operating. I can switch over the dipole and just start tuning, and all the loud stations are California. And then I switch back to the field-based special, and they're not. Here are some ideas. RG174 has about 9/10 of a dB loss at 50 feet. You'll find that RG58 comes in at, I don't remember, 6/10 or something like that. So you only lose a few tenths of a dB. Now, I have to say every dB counts when you're down right at the noise level, which you often are with QRP. So I usually do use RG58 feed line. I looked at RG8X, which has slightly less loss than RG58, but it weighs considerably more. So I pretty much settled on RG58 for my feed lines. Once in a while, I use this. I operated 80 a couple of times and used this stuff for 80, but 80 meters, people don't hear me because of the noise. So I've given up on that for the US. This is a little center insulator, which is very universal. What you can do with this guy is it's got a BNC connector there for your feed line. It's got a dowel right here. And then you can take any number of dipoles and just feed the wires back and forth through these things for strain relief, kind of like they're done, like it's done here. And you can put 2 or 3 different dipoles at different frequencies. Of course, if you do that, you need 2 extra supports for each dipole, unless you make up some kind of spreader to spread out the ends of them. Here we are using the slingshot to put it up. Done like that. Once in a while, one gets hung in a tree. I believe that's Ron. That's Les's older brother. He's, last I heard, he was an airline pilot. He might be old enough to retire. Climbing up to get one unhooked. I'm afraid I've left just a few weights dangling in trees. They're painted blaze orange, fluorescent orange, and so I'm sure that people have wondered from time to time what this fluorescent orange fishing weight is doing up to the tree 20 feet above the ground and miles and miles from any lake. Okay, this is just a couple of shots of us operating there. Typical setup. There's the table in use that I was describing. This is Tom Rousseau, K7 BJT, doing the logging. We switch off. And there's Dave. There's the table that Dave made. It's a very nice little table. But, ended up with a smaller and lighter one. The main thing for field day is to have fun, and be sure you do that. It's really been my almost only ham radio activity for many years, and I still enjoy doing it. The backpacking is kind of settled down a bit. Knees and backs and stuff like that start complaining at a certain age, and I'm at that age, or maybe a little past it. Likewise for most of my field day partners, Tom Rousseau being an exception. But the rest of them, I think, are kind of over the schlepping up 60-pound packs and stuff like that up the hill. But you can do it Wes's way and just take a little QRP rig and stick it in your rucksack and go up to the top of the mountain and still have fun. So that concludes my talk. Here are a couple of links for Field Day Special Antenna if you want to learn more about that. There's a very, very old DOS program for designing it. I've been wanting to rewrite that for Windows, and I'm partially finished, but it just keeps pushing itself down on the list, so I haven't finished it. And if you're interested in any kind of antenna analysis, by all means, download my EasyNet antenna analysis program. I retired last January, at which time I uploaded the professional version of the program with some extra features beyond the EasyNet program at the time. And and it's free, it's completely free, no charge. However, there is no support. That's the price. You get it free, but you get no support. Yeah, I'm retired. But last count, just a couple of days ago, I looked, and about 27,000 copies have been downloaded so far. That concludes my talk. Thank you very much. I'd be glad to answer questions, but I'm probably don't have time for that.
was just wondering if you know from west, whether we like to vision and with words of actually what you said, so that we can take questions. The next session we are doing it as what came up. So we have time now, and we will probably a little bit more.
Roger and Wes and Dave and Tom can all tell you that it was all BS. So here we go.
Well, I'll give some credit to the very, very tall trees in Oregon and the areas we usually go to. Roy's antennas are fabulous, but one time we hoisted an antenna up, had a center feed line on it that had it was 100 feet, so 30 meters of feed line, and we could just reach it from the ground. So they got up very high, and we had excellent locations in the mountains, always choosing a location that faced in the right direction for good propagation. So we used everything we could to get good signals out.
I forgot to mention, you can really gain a huge amount of signal strength, low angles by choosing a site that slopes kind of gently in the direction that you want to transmit. You can get by with quite low antennas if you do that. And it really helps. You can pick up 10 dB or more easily by doing that.
Well, I'll pipe in here. This is the quiet period. Roy invited me to a field day. I guess it was around 87 or 88. And it was the first time I'd done a low power field day. I'd done 100-watt field days before, but not with 5 watts. And I just was amazed. I think Roy can probably still remember me dancing around the field day site with joy and glee that we could make contacts. We made hundreds of contacts, at least 300 contacts on QRP with 5 watts. And to me, that just highlighted the magic of radio, that you can talk to somebody halfway around the world with the amount of energy it takes to walk.
Yeah, I remember that, Tom, and I remember that one of the stations we worked was a DL, and that really impressed you. That was a guy that came through a German station, and I typically work around 300 contacts or so. The best I've ever done was one year when I went by myself, actually, and I worked more than 600 contacts. That's my all-time record, but typically 300 or thereabouts is more typical. Puts us somewhere around between 4th and 5th place usually in the list. We're competing with the stations that are going up and driving their cars up and putting up big towers and beams and other stuff. There's no special category for people who haul it up themselves. Hello. Anybody else? Come on, there's got to be some quiet questions. Can the audience ask?
So, Roy, what we are going to do, can you guys hear me? Because I have to mute my speaker while I'm talking to you guys. Can you guys hear me? Okay, can you guys hear me now? Can you guys hear me now? No? Okay. Okay, now I guess you guys can hear me, right? Yeah, okay. So, So, there are quite a few people who would like to ask you guys questions. No, I know, I'll just mute this. So what we do is we type out the questions here so that there's no feedback loops. Because it's a big hall and you guys are about 500 people here actually. And kind of echoing if I put you guys on here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these questions and type them out here. And then some of you can take the questions on. Alright, so you just have to open your message list there to look at the questions. Alright?
It's one way. I saw it for a moment, and then it disappeared. Let's see, there's a, no, it's, it just showed up for a couple of seconds there, Farhan. I don't know where it went. I'm
I'll
sorry.
relay it here. I've got it. It's from Victory United to James Whiskey Beta. The name is Tehan. He's asking, what are the differences in the noise levels when you operate the QRP from home and in the field?
It's really, quite a bit. However, most of my operating on field day is, 20 and 15 meters, which are fairly low noise even at home. I don't have a very noisy environment, or didn't used to have a very noisy environment. Right now, 80 meters is completely wiped out, and 40 meters isn't too hot. So it can be at least 10 dB. And that's one of the really nice things about going out on field days. You can get to where it's really, really quiet. Thanks, Roger.
Yeah, Roy, there's a flag in the lower right for me, just to the right of the 8 Peters.
Ah, got it.